and a very warm welcome to Middle East Matters. I'm Sanam Shantier. Coming up on our programme this week, at least 11 people are killed and some 100 injured after a passenger train derailed north of the Egyptian capital. This is a country where the rail systems are outdated and poorly managed. Smuggling and sanctions in the Lebanese-Syrian border area. We'll have a report from the city of Hermel, north of the Bekaa Valley. Plus, Iran's Me Too movement is picking up steam. This after a superstar musician, Namjoo, who's been accused of sexual misconduct, dismissed and ridiculed his accusers.
Any publicity is a good publicity.
Any publicity is apparently good publicity. Now, we start our programme in Egypt this week, where a passenger train derailed north of Cairo, killing at least 11 people. This isn't an isolated incident. 3 weeks ago, 2 passenger trains collided, leaving 18 dead. Now, train mishaps are common in Egypt, where some of the country's railway system is outdated with poorly maintained equipment.
Scores of people spill out onto the tracks as passengers clamber to safety, while rescue teams search for those still trapped. Around a dozen people were killed and 100 injured as 4 train carriages derailed at a station near the city of Touk on Sunday.
We suddenly saw the train on its side. There was a lot of smoke and panic.
The train was travelling north from the capital Cairo to the city of Mansoura. Locals rushed to this nearby hospital to donate blood, where many of the injured were taken.
We were surprised when the train suddenly sped up, and then we found ourselves on top of each other. There was a lot of dust, and we were trapped.
The crash is Egypt's second deadly rail accident in just a month. On the 26th of March, at least 19 people were killed and 185 others injured when 2 trains collided south of Cairo. The cause of Sunday's crash is unclear. An investigation has been ordered by President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi. Egypt's rail authorities said 10 officials, including the driver and his assistant, have been detained. Hundreds of train accidents are reported in Egypt every year. Critics blame a lack of investment and poor management. El-Sisi's government has vowed to overhaul the country's railway system. The African Development Bank recently approved a €145 million loan to help finance a modernisation initiative.
Now, this Saturday will mark 106 years since the Armenian genocide. This refers to the killing of 1.5 million Armenians by the Ottoman Empire from 1915 to 1923. The event will be marked by a number of events, including a concert that will be broadcast live. Now, Turkey, for its part, contests these figures and denies that the killings were systematically orchestrated. Meanwhile, there have been widespread calls for the Joe Biden administration to officially recognize the World War I era Armenian genocide. Now, despite being on the brink of collapse, the Lebanese economy is keeping afloat a troublesome neighbor, that's Bashar al-Assad's Syria. In order to dodge international sanctions on the Assad regime, products such as food and petrol are being smuggled across the border into Syria on a massive scale. Here's a report from our team in Hermel.
At the end of this road, a first Syrian flag appears, along with soldiers loyal to Bashar al-Assad's government.
That's the Syrian army. We call them the Hijane. They're policing the border.
There is no checkpoint, not even a signpost, but we've just left Lebanese soil and entered Syrian territory. This road that runs along the canal is one of the border's most active smuggling hotspots. The flow of motorcycles and tinted-windowed SUVs appears never-ending opposite the Syrian army's positions, placed every few hundred meters. The border is closed because of the coronavirus pandemic, and Western powers have imposed sanctions on Syria. The United States are enforcing the Caesar bill that bans all transactions with entities linked to Bashar al-Assad or his entourage. Officially, nothing is supposed to cross the border. Sheikh Amar takes us to a plot of land he owns along the canal.
I'm taking you right onto the border. You'll see the smuggling for yourself. Let's get there before the smugglers run off. That's the Assi River. It's also the border between Lebanon and Syria. And look, You can see the Syrian border guard. There's an operation taking place over there on the bridge. The cars park, and they load them up.
The smugglers have spotted our camera.
Stop filming.
Now, when the Me Too movement started sending reverberations across the globe in 2017, Iranian women in and out of the country felt little glimmers of hope in the face of a largely patriarchal society. But the campaign was still somehow out of reach for many. That was until late last summer when one by one Iranian women started taking to social media with their own accounts of sexual abuse and harassment. Among those accused of misconduct, Mohsen Namjoo, who's been dubbed the Bob Dylan of Iran. And that story has resurfaced over the recent days. In a leaked audio recording, Namjoo's heard saying, and I quote, "No doesn't mean no."
If I'm cancelled, how will that bring justice for these women? You are trying to take away the work of someone, I'm sorry to say, whose breath is worth 6 months of your lives.
I did contact Namjoo for comment. I haven't heard back. Now, to look at the bigger picture, I'd like to welcome Susan Takamasebi, an Iranian feminist and women's rights activist to the program. Susan, thanks so much for being with us. Surprising to say, this story has been rather polarizing among Iranians. It should be straightforward, shouldn't it? It doesn't matter who you are. You cannot dismiss the need for consent.
No, you're right. It has been polarizing, and it seems that the issues are pretty straightforward. But unfortunately, despite how successful this Me Too movement has been, and initially people were very receptive to the stories that came forward. But when the higher profile men were named through the Me Too movement, there was reaction from the general public, and this, falls alongside of those same kinds of reactions. So there's been a lot of resistance by people who consider themselves fans of Namjoo, and a lot of anger against feminists and women who've come forward.
You just mentioned there's been resistance. Someone like Namjoo does have a superstar status. Many of his celebrity friends have either remained muted or even come out to defend him, right?
Well, I think that many sort of defended him, either remained rather silent until he came out with his apology just a few days ago. But since this leaked tape, which is obviously a very private conversation that he didn't expect to surface, and that represents his frustration and anger about what he's going through. And I should mention that we don't really know when this tape was, this recording took place, this discussion took place. But since then, several high-profile supporters and friends of him have actually come forward and expressed their dismay and said that they've cut ties with him.
So I suppose that's a positive step, but looking at the bigger picture, if we want together, how do you see this movement evolving among Iranians? Because, we've heard mentions, many are taking to different platforms to call for Namjoo to be cancelled, for his music to be taken off the airways, as we heard in that soundbite earlier, and his concerts called off.
Well, there's obviously a lot of anger. I think that some of that anger is, is justified. And I think we have to see how it unfolds. There are definitely a number of groups and feminist activists that are calling for a more tempered approach to what's happened, that they have consistently said, and this has been a consistent strain in the Me Too movement, within Iran and outside, that has said that we don't really want to destroy the lives of people who are perpetrators who've made mistakes, that we want to correct the wrong that's been done, and that we want to create opportunities for learning. So I think a lot of it really depends on what Namjoo does at this point. Clearly, he's suffered a great setback, and he's lost a lot of social and moral credibility. But I think that if he takes more genuine and honest steps at an apology and offers opportunities to engage and hear the harm that he's caused, and hear why people are so frustrated with him, that perhaps that we can take steps towards repairing some of the harm that's been caused, and preventing him from being canceled. I don't think anybody should be canceled because they've made mistakes. But clearly, he has not taken the steps necessarily to repair the harm that he's made.
So that's a potential solution for Namjoo himself. And I'm going to ask you the million rial question. What is the solution here, looking at the wider picture? We have many, among them progressive men, even women, who are clearly somehow still, among Iranians, legitimizing, if you can say, misogyny. It's a system that still happens to value a man's reputation more than a woman's suffering. Briefly, if you can, Susan.
Well, this has been a very frustrating, this Me Too movement has been a very frustrating movement for many of us who've worked on women's rights for years, because we are seeing people from the very segment that we thought were our greatest supporters, right? So these are progressive, intellectual men who have consistently claimed that they're supportive of women's rights and the women's movement. So it clearly shows that we have a long, long way to go in terms of educating the public and educating the groups that we thought would be most supportive of women's rights. So it's rather disheartening and frustrating in that sense. But I think we have to also take a step back and see and realize that we have a huge task ahead of us.
Indeed, a long road awaits. And of course, thanks to women like yourself, Susan, this movement is ongoing. Susan Takamasebi, thank you so much for sharing your insights with us on Middle East Matters.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you all for watching this edition of the show. Do stay tuned.